The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And I'm so sorry, I have to ask a stupid question. Am I showing the right screen or the left screen?
You're not showing anything at the moment, Peter. So,
Oh, it didn't work. I thought I hit the right one. Try it again.
So, welcome everyone to this session of Building a Resilience Workforce. Peter, we're seeing your left-hand screen now. So if you want to go full screen mode, and you can do an introduction. Fantastic.
How about, do we have the right screen pointing outwards?
You do now. You do now.
Oh, good for me. Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome, or wherever you're joining us from. It's wonderful to be here after the Thanksgiving holiday, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn this right over to Mike Cervez, who's our Executive Director. Mike, please do the welcome for us.
Thanks, Peter. Welcome to everybody for the latest in our series of webinars on how CDOs succeed. Today we're looking at how to build a resilient workforce using data, and that follows on from a couple of earlier webinars where we have looked at how we can use data to recruit and other ways of using data in the management of our workforce. I think it's all particularly appropriate, especially as let us, fingers crossed, we sort of emerge from the darkness that has been the last 2 years of 2.5 years of COVID, and we as organizations begin to suffer what is being heralded as the Great Resignation. You know, how can you use data to make your workforce more resilient, more how can I put this, hang it so that they hang around a bit longer, rather than joining the mad rush that we are all told that we should expect. Now, it is part of a series, and it's part of a sort of a policy that we use within the International Society of Chief Data Officers to build our knowledge, to share our knowledge amongst ourselves, so that we as data officers, as data leaders, can produce better results by gaining knowledge, by sharing knowledge. And what we really want to do is to ensure that all of our members get a chance to attend these webinars, or if they are unfortunate enough to miss it, to have a chance to view it. We're at iscdo.org if you want to join. And I'm probably taking up too much of Sadie's airtime already, so I better hand over to her. Or to Peter first.
Yeah, almost. We'll get it right, Mike. There's no problem with that. So we are so fortunate today to have with us somebody who has been named as one of the 10 most admired business people to watch in 2021. Sadie, I hope that doesn't mean people are stalking you. But certainly the idea that you've managed to do so much has been widely recognized. So she is the founder and CEO of Women in Data, which is the #1 community for women in AI and tech. And I can't speak to Sadie's motivations here, but I'm older than Sadie. I'll just start out with that and say that we've been working on women in computing since I can remember, back in the early 90s. And as far as I can tell, it's been a very big challenge around this. But most people are not aware that women are, in fact, the basis for this particular career that we do. We can trace our lineage back all the way to Ada Augusta King, who is the daughter of Lord Byron, and is the person who looked at a weaving loom and decided that she could intuit that she would be able to make that weaving loom into a machine that would eventually be able to solve Bernoulli equations, or generally math, in there. And that is how far we trace our lineage back, which is about 200 or so years. And I say that because this is a relatively young and immature discipline, and we need to go further than just the young and immaturity part of it. But over 8,000 years that have occurred in the accounting profession, they have managed to create something called generally accepted accounting practices. We do not have such a thing in technology, and that is a measure of some of the things that we need to improve around. But let's talk a little bit more about Sadie. One of the things, in addition to being the founder and CEO of Women in Data, she's done an immense amount of training, 350,000 people in data science. I've been teaching for 30 years or so, and I don't have anywhere near that in terms of creds out there. So Sadie, you're either working too cheap or you're much, much more efficient about things that would go on in here. Do you want to talk about your training initiatives around that as we go through this, or do you want to just jump into the presentation, Sadie? I have a very flexible thing this morning.
I'll touch on it a little bit. I'm going to share some of my story and how Women in Data started and some of the education work I did. So I'm happy to go into it more in the presentation.
Absolutely. Well, let me finish my introduction and I'll shut up and get out of the way too. So her work has been widely featured in a number of different publications. If you just Google her, her name comes up to the top of the searches very, very quick. She's got a podcast called Data Bites that is a fun podcast to listen to. And again, the idea is here, she's, I think, in a position to make a difference in our environment, because everything that we look at as data leaders, we understand that there is more data that we have still to analyze, and we do not have the capacity to analyze it. More than half of all corporate data is simply never analyzed. So Sadie, with that, let me turn it over to you, and we'll get started and look forward to your questions. Drop them into the questions in there as well, and we'll put them together at the end and do a bit of Q&A as well. So Sadie, thank you so much for joining us.
So you may be on mute, Sadie?
Perfect. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for the wonderful introduction. It was hard to not jump in on a few of those talking points, especially the Ada Lovelace one. You know, we at Women in Data are really proud of our heritage, of the women who have led before us. And we actually have a yearly award called the Lovelace Award. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And then funny, you mentioned people watching me. My Facebook and Instagram accounts got hacked a couple of weeks ago, so they're all shut down. So maybe it isn't too good to win some awards, right? So, you know, there's pros and cons to everything. But I'm just super excited to be here and talk with everyone today, because this is a topic that is really near and dear to my heart in terms of how do we build a resilient workforce, but particularly in analytics and AI. And I don't know about each of you, but one of my strengths finders is context. And so I'm a big fan of, before I listen to someone talk, I'd like to hear some context of what is their story, like what were those experiences along the way that created this framework of thinking for them. And I think if I share a little bit of my framework of thinking, it will help to provide that context to what I'm about to share in terms of how we build that resilient workforce in analytics and AI. So not to start from the beginning of time, but growing up, I had a little bit of a non-traditional education. I was homeschooled. And so the first standardized test I ever took was an ACT test. As you can imagine, testing takes practice, so I didn't perform very well, but thankfully I had spent a large portion of my time playing the piano in high school and was able to get scholarships for piano performance. So my education journey started in piano performance, and I actually started teaching, you know, right out of high school. While I was in college, started a piano studio and was going to school for piano performance, all with the intention to be a piano teacher. However, I fell in love with science, and through general education classes, really fell in love with the scientific method and thought it was one of the most beautiful methods that have ever existed. And about halfway through, switched my major to psychology and started working in a neuroscience lab. And at that time, I was really looking towards going and getting my PhD in neuroscience. Again, I had a real love for teaching, but was working in a lab at the time to get the experience necessary to take that next step. And it was during that time in the lab that, you know, I had spent all this time taking care of the rodents and studying the rodents. And unfortunately, once I was finished with my experiments with them, I was required to euthanize these rodents. And it was a Friday afternoon when I was about to go through that process, and I went and I held the rodent in my hand, and something happened where we caught eyes with each other, and there was this moment of connection. And during that moment, you know, I saw this animal in a new light and was like, why am I doing this? How can I do harm? And I really left the lab that day a bit distressed of like, there has to be a better way for me to do what I love, which is science, without doing something I don't love as much, which is doing harm. And so, in 2013, into 2014, I went to my most trusted advisor, Google, and started to search what other options were out there. And I was lucky enough to find data science, and within 2 weeks, quit at the lab, went and got a job as a research analyst, and then started my data science journey initially on Coursera. And so that pivot point was really key in my career. Within a matter of 4 to 5 years, I'd already switched kind of my focus and career path at least 3 times. And we see this really common in college students, but I think what we're going to see more and more is this is going to carry over not just in college, but in early career, mid-career, and later in life. It's estimated that people will switch their careers about 4 to 6 times now within their lifetime. So my journey into data science, I started on Coursera and then realized I needed to get a master's in it. And so I was getting my master's in it. I was working full-time, moved into an analytics engineer role, and was getting my master's. And I was a bit surprised when I was entered the field, just how few of women were in there. And, hadn't finished my master's yet, so I wasn't a full-on data scientist, but I knew that starting with just 2 people, so there was myself and 1 other woman in my classes, the trend line for how many people were going to get into this field was a little bit limited. And so not only did I see the prospects of this being limited, but also in terms like if I was going to survive in this field, I needed a community of people. And so Women in Data started really just from a personal need of needing a community for myself, but then a vision of more equality in the space, as I was so excited about this field and the opportunity that was available with it. I wanted to make sure everyone had equal opportunity to enter this state if they wanted to. So I started by just having a local networking session, back before a time when we could meet in person, and just hosted a local networking session at a restaurant in the city I was in. And, like most events, lots of people registered. And as you got closer and closer to the event, the registrations started to fall one by one. All tell, we had about 5 registrants left. But I still showed up, and as I was there waiting for people to join, the time had came when we were supposed to start networking, and I found myself to be sitting by myself at a table with no one there. And this was quite a distraughting moment because, when you're reaching out to find community and no one answers your call, there was a lot of anxiety and wishes that I should just pack up my bags and go home. But I realized, hey, there's still a few people who are registered. Maybe I should wait 15 more minutes. So I decided to wait 15 more minutes. And thankfully I did, because one person showed up and she brought 2 other people with her. And that is really the beginning of how Women in Data started. It really started with one person showing up and bringing another. And, it's incredible to see the growth of it, because today we have a community of over 30,000 people and are in 50 cities and 17 countries. So I really advocate for people to start with the power of one in one person. But through this time, as I was, working in data science, and I had the opportunity to lead a data science team at a Fortune 500 company, also was able to then move into consulting and consult for companies like Google and different state contracts for contact tracing programs. I really fell in love with the practice in the field, but again, I started to notice how many companies struggle with including diverse people into their teams. And so this last year in January, I left the public and private space and joined Women in Data full time to lead this organization. So Women in Data started, as I said, again, with a need for community and a vision for equality. But one of the key factors that impacted, our mission and vision was in 2018, the World Economic Forum came out with the Future of Jobs report. And in that Future of Jobs report, it really outlined how work is changing in the next 4 years and what we need to do about it. And that was a huge motivation for a lot of the programs that we have developed today. And so really what I want to chat about with each of you today is what we've learned in this past 4 years in terms of developing people and building a resilient workforce, but also how it's even more relevant today than it was back in 2018. And so to start, I really like to break things down into like the simplest form and simplest matter as possible. So when we talk about building a workforce, we have to first identify what is work and what is the history of work, right? So if you just Google, work and look for the definition, you're going to get actively involving mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or result. And I think this is a great definition, right? I love how it's mental or physical, right? And it's either, a purpose or a result. So there's options there in terms of how we use work. But speaking in a context of work in a ways to support our means, it's important to think about how work has changed as we've evolved as humans, right? So if you think of work in the beginning, we worked and operated from a hunter-gatherer standpoint. Work was very much a survival of like, hey, I need these basic needs. I need food, I need water, I need shelter, I need safety, right? And we worked as individuals to do that. Then we found and evolved and found that, hey, it works so much better when we actually work as a collective, and tribes were formed, right? And through that operating model of forming tribes, we then were able to expand and have people start to specialize in skills. And through that specialization in skills, then we start to get markets and barter systems and trade. And then from there, it really started to span into what we now term as the Industrial Revolutions, right? So the first Industrial Revolution starting with coal in 1765, the second with gas in 1870, the third with electronics and nuclear in the 1960s and 70s, and then now the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is the one we're living in, and that is the one with the internet and AI. And I think it's really important to know, as we look back at history, like we're also creating history and in a way living through history right now. I just shared a couple things a few minutes ago, and now that's already history, right? And so I think it's important to understand, like, work has always been evolving and is continuing to evolve. And we must understand like how those evolutions are happening in our lifetime so that we can help train our teams and build that resilient workforce for these changes. So it doesn't take much to Google in the news, and I pulled up a few articles just that are literally came out just this week. And one of the big challenges that we're facing right now is just people quitting their jobs, right? So, human resource professionals say their job is harder than ever, right? Workers are quitting their jobs in droves to become their own bosses. New data finally shows why people are quitting their jobs, and it's not because they're lazy. So we're faced right now with a really interesting problem where people are quitting, right? So that's one problem we're faced with in terms of the changes that are coming about. But another problem that we're faced with is work is changing, and there's redundant roles, there's new roles, there's stable roles, and people are trying to understand, am I in a stable role? Am I in a redundant role? Do I need a shift? If I'm in a redundant role, is that going away today, or is that something that I have time to upskill and reskill? And then on top of that, between the stable and redundant roles, we've had this horrific pandemic that's really accelerated the movement of these changes even more. So we have big challenges ahead of us, right? With roles changing, skills changing, people quitting. But at the end of the day, I am an optimist, right? And I like to look at the opportunity. And so again, this is from the Future of Jobs survey from 2018, and it's predicting 2022, which is really just around the corner for us. So it's not looking out super far in advance anymore, but I highly recommend everybody read this report because all of the predictions are very accurate in it. And I think it's a really great synopsis of the times that we're living in. So looking at the opportunity though, the opportunity is really on a skills-based level. And the opportunity is for us as leaders and CDOs. When we look at the skills that are relevant, it comes down, the top ones are all related into analytics and critical thinking and the data that's behind it. So, you know, trending for 2022, the top one is the analytical thinking and innovation, and then active learning and learning strategies and creativity and technology and design, everything that encompasses the work that we do today. And so I think this is a really big call to action. And I think there's even more of a need for leadership, not just only within our organizations, but within our community. So when we think about building a resilient workforce, I break down the problem into two spheres. One is how many new people are we bringing in and filling the pipeline with, and then how many people are we retaining? And so how I look at that is in terms of opportunity, right? So how do we get more people into this space? And at the end of the day, it really starts with education, right? So education has to not only be from a traditional sense of, you know, K through 12, college, and all of that is good. We still need education of these new and relevant skills in that space. But education really has to be at the whole enterprise. One of the things that we're seeing, I just read a great article from the Wall Street Journal this week in terms of how we need to get rid of our IT departments. Essentially, we have to get rid of this order taking an island created of the business versus the IT departments, because essentially we aren't getting things done as fast as we need to. And I think the same can be said for our data departments, right? A lot of times they're separate from the business, and that causes a lot of problems because we don't have that connection to what those needs and opportunities are. So we want to make a change in this space. Really, it comes down to education. So education, not just from our tech teams and upskilling them, but educating our marketing teams, educating our supply chain teams, educating our finance teams, helping them understand how to use this new and emerging technology, how to understand data, and how to use AI in their business practices so that we can work as one to achieve what we're looking to. So education, I think, is important, not only from the standpoint of, you know, our own teams and making sure we're growing, but also at the whole enterprise level. In addition, there's some really great things happening within education right now. You know, we have new organizations coming out to make it more accessible to people like Coursera's and Udemy. But then we also have some new models being tested in terms of how do we better reward people for education. And so I really love the company. It's called earn.com. Essentially, you go and you take classes and you'll earn cryptocurrencies for different classes and assessments that you learn. And so I love this example because I think it's a really proactive approach to how do we really start to upskill and reskill people within this area. And then the second thing that's happening in education is from the companies that I work with they're really making sure they have KPIs set for their workforce around, you know, the education and continual learning that their employees are participating in. And so I think gone are the days of, you know, you pick one conference a year and you go to that conference and that's kind of your education budget for the year. Education must be weaved into the daily routine, the weekly routine, and there must be KPIs set against it so that we can measure and track that success. So those are some of the things just from like an organizational side that can be done in terms of education. But then if we take a broader look at education, not only within our organizations and the upskilling and reskilling that needs to happen there, I like to look at it from a community-based approach, right? And I think the first thing to recognize is that we are all teachers. Whatever, your status, your education level, you have experience that would be helpful to somebody else. And so it's essential that we all realize we have something to learn, we have something to teach, and we have someone we can mentor. And especially as leaders in this space of CDOs, who have some of the most in-demand skills and knowledge, we all should be called to teach, right? And you can teach in the traditional sense. You can teach at a college or university, but then there's also the non-traditional, right? And teaching, going to your kid's school and sharing what you do so that they get exposure to these jobs and opportunity. I think we must take a non-traditional approach to this to start to provide more awareness and education and opportunity in this space. And if you think about it, like one of the education institutions I love is Khan Academy. And Khan Academy started really just with one uncle creating YouTube videos to tutor his nieces and nephews, right? So he started with his most inner circle of what was available to him. And because of that, put the videos on YouTube so that his nieces and nephews could access them easily. And now from that, he educates thousands of people across the globe. So I think it's really essential that we step up to realize that we are all teachers. I have had this experience, I taught piano for a while, but I didn't anticipate teaching data science. And when I got approached by UC Davis to teach the SQL for Data Science class, again, I didn't feel like I had time to do it, but, Coursera was such an instrumental point in my data science journey that it really was important for me to give back to the community. And so because of that, desire to give back, I went through with teaching the course. And as you now know, over 350,000 people have taken the course, which is fantastic. But I think what I have been most surprised about is how much I learned from my students. And when I teach, I also am a student. And so there's this cyclical benefit that happens when we really embrace this idea that we're all teachers, whether that be if we mentor someone, if we, train our nieces and nephews, or if we teach at a university. And then the second aspect of the opportunity is really on the inclusion standpoint. And I really like to take a little bit different an approach to inclusion of, there's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion today, which is fantastic. And I think it means that we're making a lot of progress. But sometimes I have organizations come to me and it's more of like a have to do something about it, right? And I like to encourage people, this is not something that you have to participate in or do anything. You should, it's a very good thing, but this is where the opportunity is, right? And this is where the real opportunity is for innovation, for your organization, but also for new skills and ideas that are brought into your organization. Because when we think about filling these roles that we have and building that resilient workforce, we need to make sure that it's strong from all levels. And so D&I really is all about making sure that we have people across the organization who are going to be able to fill these diverse roles in the future. And again, it starts with the people, right? The opportunity is much greater than the demand. Companies estimate by 2024, approximately 40% of the workforce will require up to 6 months of reskilling. So what does this mean? This means that there's a huge opportunity for us to include more people in the conversation. And it's not just the people we have currently today, but it's the people that we need to open up this space to. And so when we think about who it is that needs included in the conversation, there's a couple of key aspects of who isn't being included, right? So today within at least the data and analytics space, we have only 27% representation of female. Well, our gender statistics are quite stable over time, right? You know, it's about a 50-50 ratio. So that's pretty simple math, that there's a huge percentage of the population being missed that could fill these roles that isn't being addressed. The other side of things is from a racial aspect, right? So within data and analytics, we have about 49% are Caucasian, 30% Asian, 6% Hispanic and Latinx, and then 3% Black and African American. And so, you know, and I should mention this is for the US market only. So again, there's a huge opportunity on the Hispanic and the Black and African American population that really isn't being captured. And this is where, if we want to bring more into the conversation, these are the people that we need to make sure we're including. In addition, it doesn't get talked about a lot, but there's the disability aspect, right? So 1 in 4 US adults have some form of disability, but within the data and analytics profession, only 6% do. So again, really taking a look at what are our hiring practices? What are the technical tests that we have? Is that excluding people from this conversation? And then the fourth I have on here is a professional standpoint. So again, this goes back to what I was mentioning before in terms of getting rid of the idea of there's the business and the technical or the data teams, right? So only 21% of the global workforce is data literate. So that's talking about who's even just currently working. So there's a huge opportunity to make friends with other areas of people in the business and help again to educate them in terms of how this technology can be applicable to their life. So where do we start? Again, it starts with the education process in terms of how we're sharing this knowledge. Secondly, it starts with the hiring. So really looking at the wording of our job descriptions, making sure, you know, if we're using, and hopefully not any resume filtering algorithms, really clearly looking what were those trained on and who and what are those filtering out. And then looking at the testing process for hiring, especially for technical skills. And then we start with the retention, right? So a lot of times when I'm consulting for organizations in terms of their D&I, the first question I ask is, who do you have currently and what can we do to take care of them, right? So everybody's always looking to get more and new, but really it starts with who you currently have, how you help them, and then we'll be able to bring others along. And then we start with the leadership, right? We start to make sure that our leadership is inclusive and that we have representation from all levels. So what we can do about some of these things is, if we really want to focus more on the inclusion side of things and the opportunity that is available here, there's a couple key things to do. One, you can sponsor, and what I mean by sponsor comes in a lot of forms. Maybe that's, you know, connecting a minority group with the right resources, the right mentor, giving them their own voice, being an advocate for them when they can't speak for themselves. Being able to listen. I think this is something that seems very simple, but so often gets overlooked, is the ability to actively listen is something that is so cherished by many people, but so rarely used. And then finally, again, just being able to speak up and advocate for others and educate those in the space. So huge opportunity on the diversity and inclusion side. There are so many people out there who want to be a part of this exciting field, and there is a ton of opportunity for us to educate and include them in the conversation. But as I mentioned before, it's not just about who we are getting into these roles, but also how are we growing people that we currently have. So again, you know, one of the problems that we have is in regards to retention. And within Women in Data, we have done a study this year understanding what the new normal looks like for women and how they want to define it. So we started with a focus groups that were held within our local chapters. That information then was taken and used for a survey, And then the survey now is being used to start to define a datathon we'll be hosting in May of 2022. But from the results, I don't have the full results yet, but from the results of the focus groups and the survey, what we found is in regards to retention of employees, what they're really looking for are key simple factors, and that is to listen, to grow, and to inspire. So many of them have said, like, if my employer just took the time to really listen to what I care about in my career, where I'm looking to go, what are my goals, like, I would have never left. And having an exit interview, it's too late. Like, that's, we're not doing any good by that time. And so many people right now really want to be heard. And I think a lot of this is coming from the acceleration of this from the pandemic, right? We've been isolated and, our modes of work have changed. We no longer have coworkers sitting next to us, but are sitting alone in our home, right? And connecting online. So people right now are really asking to be heard, and they're asking to be heard from their employers. And then the second thing on the retention side is they wanted to have opportunities to grow. So it's not so much that career paths aren't clearly outlined, but like grow in skills. And especially for those in the data and analytics space, skills are everything. If you're using old tools and you're working at that company and there's no opportunity to use new tools, if you stay, your skills are going to be out of date. And so employees are getting very aware of this and conscientious of this. And so they really want to have those opportunities to grow their skills, to grow their leadership abilities. And that doesn't always mean a career path of, okay, you're going to be an individual contributor for 3 years and then move into management. A lot of this growth ability comes down to the skills aspects. And then the third thing in the retention side that we found is the inspire. So they're really looking to be inspired by a mission or a purpose within the organization that is more than just selling widgets or making sure there's operational efficiency. And so I think as leaders, this is a big calling for all of us to make sure that we are, clearly acknowledging our mission as organization, identifying our values, and making sure that every strategy and every project we do is tied into that mission and values. Because the people joined your organization most likely because there was a resonance with the mission. And so on the retention side of things is, how do we not lose that? How do we make sure that mission and vision is still involved in every day of our life, whether it's a simple task or a large project? And so on the retention side, again, we are all responsible, especially for that first aspect that we've heard. What people want the most is really someone to listen to them. And again, as leaders, I think we're even more responsible, but I really just like to take personal responsibility of my personal responsibility to listen, to grow, and to inspire people. And then on the retention side of things, I wanted to dive a little bit more into this inspiration, because I think there's a lot of opportunity in how we can inspire change and make sure that we are inspiring change within our employees. And this inspiration comes through innovation, and innovation really starts with the creative process. So during the pandemic, I'm one of those people who got a pandemic hobby. Thankfully, I did not get a pandemic puppy, but I did get a pandemic hobby. And the hobby I acquired was painting abstract art. And this has been an incredible process because I have learned so much about being a student and being new and being a novice at things. But I really learned the most through this process of learning to paint was I really learned about innovation. And what I found in this process is, at our core, we are all creative. But in order to inspire that creativity, we must create a safe place for people to fail, to learn, and to use our imagination. And this is a challenge. I mean, this has always been a challenge before the pandemic, but I think, if your workforce is still working remote, sometimes it's hard to really know what that space looks like because we aren't in the conversation. There's a lot of digital conversations that are going on. And so to create this safe space, which allows for creativity, which that creativity then allows for innovation, what needs to happen is there needs to start to be some vulnerability in talking about failures, right? And starting to change our framework for what those failures look like. So in my process of creating art, there were many paintings that I will have said, quote unquote, failed at. But what I learned is you can paint over it, and like not all failure is final, and there's opportunity to take every brushstroke as an inspiration to try again and to use our imagination and to stretch the work that we're doing. And I see a lot of that in the data space. We have large initiatives that we're taking part in and hard deadlines, and none of those should be thrown to the side, but we must create some space in our life to explore, to draw something on the board, to create a new program. It maybe doesn't work perfect the first time, but we can code over it, right? We can delete it, we can start anew, and really that space to innovate and learn from. So at Women in Data, we have started to address this problem of how do we get more people in the pipeline, and then how do we help them grow through their careers through retention and accelerating to higher levels in their position. And we found 3 key factors of what we use. So the first one is the awareness. So again, we want to be able to get more people into this space. And a lot of times it comes down to not even knowing that this is a career opportunity. And so that awareness is really big for us, of just letting them know, hey, this is a career. There's over 50 jobs within the data science family. So there's lots of opportunity here, and the space is open and welcoming. So to do the awareness, we start from a grassroots approach all the way to a global approach. So we have local chapters that have networking events. We have regions that come together, and then we have global webinars. But the awareness is not enough, right? We don't want to leave people hanging. We don't want to say, hey, come into this great space. There's so much opportunity. So then it really moves into the education side of things. And on the education side of things, we run virtual study groups through Data Camp. We have career track programs, and then we have a residency program that allows people to get hands-on experience within regards to a data science problem or a data engineering problem. So the awareness and education are focused on what we call our newbies, our career changers, and then our practitioners, for people are practicing in the space. But then for our data leaders and for those who are really at any stage of their career, we're really looking to see how can we advance them in their career. And that really comes through mentorship, through life coaching, and then we have job placement that we offer through some of our hiring partners. So all of this work has come about from really just listening to our community, listening to their wants and needs, taking an approach of understanding the work environment that we live in and how it's continually changing, and how do we make sure that we're creating an equal opportunity and space for that. And so we have big goals to achieve. We have a long way to go in terms of achieving equal representation, but I think more importantly than that is we all have work to be done to make sure that we're creating more opportunity in this space to build that resilient workforce. And again, because I'm a big fan of personal responsibility, I really love to look at the aspect of what can I do as an individual. And it really does start with one. Women in Data started with one person coming to the first meeting and taking action, right? And so to build that resilient workforce, it starts with one person, one individual who includes others in the conversation and advocates for more people in this space. So one individual who converses, and then one individual who shares their knowledge, who teaches, who mentors, and educates to bring others into the development. And that really comes from giving back, from volunteering. If you are in this space, you have knowledge, whether, whatever level you're at in the organization. And so I think it's almost our responsibility that we've been fortunate enough to get that knowledge to help share and educate others to bring it along. And then finally, it's really one individual who imagines a more compassionate world and uses the tools of technology to create it. So there is so much opportunity for us to create and to innovate and create that safe place where we can start to imagine a new and better future. So I'll leave you with this. My personal mission is to create a more compassionate and connected world through technology. And for me right now, that work starts with people. It starts with who we're including in the conversation, who we're educating, who we're listening to so that we can retain, and who we are inspiring and creating safe places for, that they can create the future that will hopefully create a more compassionate and connected world. So I appreciate you taking the time for me to share this with you today, and I hope you will join me on this journey. I'll hand it back over to you, Peter.
Sadie, thank you so much for a great talk. We had a number of people that were listening, and we do have some questions here, so let me take a quick look at the Q&A. Oh, this is a pretty practical question. Sadie, if one joins your blog and website, do you have an archive to find the information that you have found in the past?
You know what? I don't have an archive. I have an archive for the articles I put out, but I will try. I can enable that, I'm pretty sure, with the click of a button. So I appreciate these suggestions. I'll make sure that gets enabled.
Absolutely. I also saw that Wall Street Journal article that you referenced too. If you have a link for that, I'm pretty sure it would be helpful for everybody else, because as you said, context is huge. In fact, in data, context is everything, of course. So I certainly agree with that, and it'll help everybody else to sort of see what are the ways. If you have other questions for Sadie, by all means, drop them into the questions chat chunk at the GoToWebinar control panel that you have there. Here's another question for you, Sadie. What are some ways companies are using data to study and adjust the employee experience? And Sadie, maybe since I'm sitting here at my university office today, maybe I'll put a little bit of context on that question as well. There's something in academic literature called the reproducibility problem. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yes. So they've gone through that here, and one of the things that little challenge, and that's a separate discussion, if it goes to get into that, we can take that one offline, but that much of the research that is being done in the academic world is not translating into practice. And so NSF and other groups are looking at grant series to put on that. And part of it came as a result of this exercise where they found out they simply couldn't reproduce a lot of scientific research. So we've got a group dedicated at the university here that's taking the research that comes out of these communities and then trying to make it more directly accessible. They're doing that through a series of metadata projects. In other words, it's like another series of index levels to the research. I'm not sure that's actually going to help, but let me get back to Ryan's question, because he's the one that asked it, and maybe you and I can go on to that other piece a little bit later. So again, Ryan's question is, what are some ways companies are using data to study and adjust the employee experience? I can tell you, for example, here at the university, they've done nothing, but there are some other places that will have to do some things. Now, if you're running a university of 35,000 people, that's going to take some time and effort and things. So I'm not dinging my university for having done nothing yet. But again, you're going to be a lot closer to that, and I'm only giving you one data point. So.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. And, what I've seen is, in the challenges, this is the employee experience and who monitors that is usually sits within the HR department. And so again, this goes back to my argument of like, hey, we need training for people, not just in the technical teams, but really in the business teams. And what we've seen is there's there's not as much work in this space because there's still a lot of opportunity to educate the HR department on what can be done with data. So there's a couple of new companies though who are emerging that I really like. So Humanix is a new startup that essentially they created a chat bot that your employees can chat with anytime to just share their experiences as a means for HR teams to start to collect more data on the employee's experience in real time. And so I think there's startups that are creating new products and innovations in that regard that are going to be really useful. But again, I think we've been a little kind of behind the 8 ball in that regards in terms of our HR teams. And I'll hand it back to you, Peter.
Sadie, I'm not sure whether Peter's having a problem there, but while we wait on Peter's mic coming back, we did have another question from Wade. So his question is, how do we make our workforce authentically feel appreciated, valued, and listened to in a time in austerity? Our higher education institution has gone through these rounds, through 3 rounds of layoff in the past years due to provincial budget cuts, and looking forward to another one. Could one understand they might be skeptical? One could understand they might be skeptical that they are as valued as we honestly expect them to. The environment naturally causes that environment naturally causes fantastic resources to look elsewhere, and it's a challenge. So, how would you respond back to that question?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a tough one. What I think you're getting at here is sometimes what can be taken as actions are not aligned with the words, right? So if you're saying, hey, we really care, and then at the same time you have to lay off a bunch of people, there can be a disconnect between those words and actions. And I think in cases like that, it really comes down to just transparency, right? And these can be really hard conversations to have. But I think the more that we slow down and take the time to have those, the more healing that can come. So there's a really great book, Compassionate Business, and it talks about how to have those difficult conversations, like such as layoffs and cutbacks, in a really compassionate way that where people can get healed. So I would recommend checking out that book.
Excellent. Sadie, thanks indeed. Just for anyone else, those were the questions that had come up, and just Sadie, Peter just texted me, says that his internet connection failed at the university, so he will try and join back in, but if not, Mike, do you want to add anything to the ending here? And you are on mute as well, Mike.
Can't believe that we're done with questions after such a interesting and fact-filled presentation.
Well, the good thing is, Mike, that has been recorded, so we can certainly forward this out. But those were the questions that were put out there. People can put another question in the chat box, but I think that, as Sadie mentioned, this is a journey. Certainly, as the new world evolves around us, we all have to do better, right? And so, what better means is unique to each individual, but I think we all need to kind of take that role on ourselves and say, how can I do better for myself? And understanding what work means, and whether it's at manual or mental effort. But yes, I will leave it off to you.
I find it interesting. And Sadie, if you're still there, I mean, how do you see the change in work patterns really affecting those issues that you talked about, in as much as with perhaps more mothers working from home, and then thus getting dragged more into, if they are mothers, working with the family during the day, and how that might yet hinder their sort of opportunities going forward.
Yeah, so I mean, we already know that women have to take time off when they have children, right? And so
Yeah.
that usually sets them back a little bit in their career. But now I think what's scary is it's happening even more, right? Not just when you have children, but if you have young children with it, just what we've heard from our community is it just felt like the walls weren't closing in on them, right? Where everyone was at home, working from home, doing school from home. It felt like everything was falling down. And so for a lot of women, they had to take that time off to care for their family. And that is going to set things back quite a bit. I think we're still waiting to see the brevity of it. Essentially, it's looking like, some reports have said it's going to set women back as much as like 40 years in equality progression. I think the numbers haven't even been finalized yet because we don't know the severity of it. So that there is a big need in calling for all of us to step up and to support and to do something at this time.
And
Sure.
Mike, your call to questions did result in a couple more questions if you want to pick them up there.
Okay, well, I'm not entirely the expert on how to extract questions from this infernal machine.
Yeah, just go to there is a question box, a little chat. You'll see it there, and you'll see the questions. Just while Mike is catching up on that, Sadie, one question from Kerry is: how do we get involved with women in data?
Yeah, so the best way is just go to www.womenindata.org, and essentially there's a tab there that you can sign up and become a member.
Excellent. Next question is.
Okay. I'm going to take up this, Robert, because I see that you have to dash because you've got another appointment.
No, that's good. I just want to make sure that you were good. You saw those questions, so I will leave that in your good hands.
Okay, mate. Thank you. So I'm going to ask one that resonates with me particularly. It's workforce data literacy is often focused on using